Hi, everyone, and welcome to our second lively edition of She Said for 2022. I'm your co-host, Lanea Stagg, the culinary chef and author of the Recipe Records Cookbook series. It's a series of cookbooks that feature recipes, interesting rock and roll stories and facts, and fantastic song lists to enjoy while you're in the kitchen rattling those pots and pans. But today I want to share with you another aspect of my writing career, a more serious side that I hope will be of help to you or to someone's that are listening today. Several years ago, I lost my best friend to a disease that took her away too soon and too young, and it was almost too much to take. But I had an experience that lifted me up and healed my heart. And it's told in my kidult story that I wrote called Little Dog in the Sun. I know with the advent of COVID that many of us have suffered losses. And even for those who haven't, these last 2 years have seemed more than a little dark. And I wanted to offer the message of hope that Little Dog in the Sun provides. It's a simple story with lovely watercolor illustrations by artist John Fuchs of Evansville, Indiana. And if you know anyone who is hurting, this sweet little book might help. You can find it and all of my books at laneastagg.com. And as a gift from me to you, from now until Valentine's Day, which is about a week away, I'll send you a free copy of Little Dog in the Sun if you would go to Julian Lennon's White Feather Foundation site and donate $5 or more. His foundation does so much good all over the globe. I'll send it with my prayers for a great 2022 filled with renewed hope.
And I second what Lanea had to say. My name's Jude Southerland Kessler. I am her co-host, trying not to cough. I am dealing with COVID still, and got it December the 31st and still having fun with COVID. So you guys stay safe as you can. As my mother used to say, be as safe as you know how to be, because it is not fun. But I want to tell you that Lanea and I both have gone through what many of you are experiencing. I've been locked up in the house for coming on 24 months in just a couple of weeks, and only go out to pick up curbside where I don't go in the store. I've been in the store 4 or 5 times, and at 11 o'clock at night when there's no one in there. So I know what it's like. There are days when I never leave the inside of this house, 5 or 6 days in a row. My nephew, young, healthy, robust, 21-year-old, almost died. He got COVID and was in the hospital 36 days. His kidneys failed. It was not good. We've been down the road that many of you have been down, and we want you to know you're not alone. We're out there. I will be happy to pray for anyone that needs prayer. We are thinking about you. And similarly, I'm the author of the John Lennon Series, which is a book that's going to be 9 books that are historical narrative on John's life. And even though you read it like a story, it's all footnoted, probably too many footnotes. I think we had 4,000 some hundred. How many, Lanea? Too many, right?
A lot.
A lot in the last book, so that you know, is she making this crap up? No, this is exactly what they ate, what they said, what they did, and so forth and so on. But I have 2 books. The last 2 books I still have in physical form. And for any of you who purchase Shades of Life, the new book, which I happen to have right here, in the next week leading up to Valentine's Day, 100% of the money will be given to Julian Lennon's White Feather Foundation in your honor. And we want you to know that you definitely are not alone. John faced difficult times in his life from age 4.5 on. And in fact, the reason that I write about him isn't because he was a great composer or he was a great artist or he was a great writer, but because life kicked him. and he never let it get him down. I mean, over and over, he turned the pain of his life into the soundtrack of ours. And so we're there with you, and we're inspired by this, by the guests that we're going to have on today, who I'm going to tell you a lot of incredible things that he's done in a few minutes. But to me, the most incredible thing that he does, Lena's going to tell you about right now.
That's right. Tonight, our special guest really embodies the spirit of caring and kindness, and that is so important in the world today. He spends a great deal of his free time doing important charity work in his community, and to him, caring for family and for others who need help is job one. A few years ago, he authored a wonderful book called John Lennon, Life is What Happens. And recently he was given a mammoth task that both Jude and I are grateful we weren't asked to accomplish.
Number one, they wouldn't ask us because not only is he a musician himself, which definitely helped him to make the evaluations he was called upon to make, but he's also a writer for Goldmine magazine. He has a monthly column that is, I've got it right here, called Power Pop Plus. Now, he does that online, but he also contributes to Goldmine in print. He's interviewed unbelievable people, but Lena's going to be so jealous when I tell this, but he got to interview Cheap Trick and Graham Parker, and he's not alone again naturally because he just interviewed Gilbert Sullivan. So he's done some amazing things. I wanted you to actually see the books that he's done. The first book I do not have, and I should have. It's called Shake Some Action, The Ultimate Power Pop Guide. This was his second book, John Lennon, Life is What Happens. Let me back up so you can get a good view of that. And this isn't just, you see some memorabilia that is connected to John with the stories of that memorabilia, but you also get a biography of John's life in this wonderful book as well. John Lennon, Life is What Happens. And man, that couldn't be truer. But he has a brand new book out, and this is one that Lena was referring to. It's a gorgeous book. Isn't that beautiful? It was published by Rare Bird there, and it's a gorgeous book. There's the back of it. Yeah, you're getting both sides now. And in it, he was asked to evaluate the 100 most pivotal Beatles moments. And by Beatles, I mean Beatles together and Beatles solo. So how he did that, I do not know. Our hat is off and his hat is on. Mr. John Borack. Yay! Hey, John.
Thank you both so much. It's such an honor to be here with you. Both of you ladies inspire me with everything that you do. And everything you do, not only for the Beatles community, but otherwise. And it's just an honor to be here chatting with you. Thank you both so much.
Well, we're just impressed to look at your collection behind you. That is so awesome. And I am so glad that you're using a real backdrop so that, have you seen the ones where people morph in and out of the?
Yes.
You're not sure if they're warping or if they're being.
No, this is all real. I've got some of my collection behind me. Directly behind me, you can't see it, but it's a Paul McCartney autographed photo that a friend of mine actually gave me, who used to own a restaurant and had it personally signed when Paul made an appearance down in Los Angeles. So that's one of my most treasured pieces of memorabilia, along with my butcher cover that I acquired about 2 years ago.
Wow. Well, my friend and I spent hours and hours and hours in her kitchen when we found out about the butcher cover, steaming off her butcher cover. And she did have the original underneath, but unfortunately, we did such a horrible job of steaming it off. We tore it in places and, you know, we really messed it up, but I'm sure she still has it. You know, that was a great afternoon. Well, John, okay, let's talk about the book, because the concept of Beatles 100 is entirely unique. And I might have run away if they'd asked me to do this, because they wanted you to choose the 100 most pivotal moments, not only of the Beatles together, but the Beatles separately. And I would have felt like that was pretty much overwhelmingly impossible, but you do it. And Tell us what the process was. How did you make lists? Did you talk to people? Did you get advice? How'd you do this?
Well, I've always been sort of a list maker, and I like writing pieces about music that deal with lists. My first book that you mentioned, Shake Some Action, was the top 200 power pop albums of all time. That was the basis of that book, ranking them from 1 to 200. So after I wrote the John Lennon book, Life is What Happens, which was released in 2010, did another book, Shake Some Action 2.0, which was 2017. And I thought I'd like to write another Beatles book, but how can I approach it from an angle that hasn't been done already? Because as you both know, so many different Beatles books out there by so many talented authors. And I was thinking, what could I do that could possibly approach it from any sort of a different angle? And I thought, well, I love making lists and I love the Beatles. So why not make a list of those top 100 moments and rank them from 1 to 100 in what I feel is the order of importance. Now, with any list, it's all subjective. It's all one person's opinion. And as I think I may have mentioned to you, Jude, at one point offline, if I had to make the list again today, it would probably be ranked differently. If I had to make it the day after I wrote the book, I would probably have ranked things differently. So it's all subjective. It's all in fun. It's it's meant to spark discussions. People are going to agree with some of my entries and the order in which they're ranked. They're going to disagree with some, but it's all in fun, and taken as a whole, I think presents a good capsule history of the band for newcomers and also for folks who have been following the band for a while. I tried to dig a little bit more deeply and find some quotes that hadn't been used to death over and over and over in a lot of Beatles books that I've read. So did a lot of research online and reading other Beatles and solo Beatles books as well, and very happy with how it came out.
Yeah, it is really amazing. And you got to have a thick skin to do this, because you know from the get-go that people are going to disagree with you. I mean, that's a given. You could say anything, any statement about the Beatles, and there's going to be someone. I love to pick on Al Sussman about this, because he overheard me saying one day that I prefer John Lennon's solo music to the Beatles. And so about a half hour later, he comes up to my table and he had the same look that you do. And he goes, "Did I just hear you say you prefer John Lennon's solo music to the Beatles?" I said, "Yes. Give me some examples." And so I did. And music, the love of music is subjective, and what you consider to be important or a notable event or whatever is all subjective. So you had to go into this knowing people were going to argue with you, right?
Oh, sure. I've done interviews regarding this book. At one in particular, where the person who interviewed me basically spent the whole interview telling me how I was wrong about everything that I ranked and why this should be higher than this and this should be higher than that. And and that's their right. It's all subjective. It's all in fun. Yeah. As long as the death threats don't come too often, I'm probably okay with that.
That is so good. Okay, so before I started it, I made my own list of the top 10, but I didn't look at yours. And then I looked at yours and see, because I don't think outside the box. I'm in a tight little box. I thought, well, of course, the number one most pivotal moment has to be Uncle George's death, because that makes John turn to Julia, who comes to comfort him in George's absence. And when she does, they become best friends, and she teaches him to play the guitar and whispers to him that he has music in his bones, because without that, there are no Beatles. But you're not doing this. I want you to explain this to people. This isn't a sequential, if this, then this, then this, then this, then this list. So talk to them about that.
Well, yeah, it's not sequential, as you said. It's not sort of a cause and effect type of book, whereas if this didn't happen, then this wouldn't have happened. If that didn't happen, then that didn't happen. It's taking moments such as the Beatles coming to America, Ringo replacing Pete Best, John meeting Paul, John meeting Yoko, taking those events and sort of ranking them again, in what I feel is the order of importance in the overall history of the band, both as the Beatles and as solo performers. So it
Right.
sort of gave me a wide berth there to determine what I felt was more important than something else. And you can look at, with any list, you can look at number 54 and say, how is that more important than number 57? Well, it might not be, but you have to rank them somewhere. And when I compiled this list on that given day, that's where these fell for me, the top 100 moments.
Right, right. And did you do this solely on your own, or did you ask buddies and people and other musicians?
Oh no! If I would have asked other people, I'd be still writing this book, because everybody has an opinion, and so many people I've shown this book to, the opinions range generally from, wow, that's really cool, to, oh, you're wrong. So, and that's exactly what I'd hoped it would do. I'd hoped people would enjoy it, and I hoped it would, spark those discussions, because, the three of us and so many out there who are watching and listening, we love to talk about the Beatles. So I can tell you why I think Ram is Paul McCartney's finest solo album, even though most people would say Band on the Run, just like Jude, you would say that John Lennon's solo work is better than the Beatles, which I'm still trying to wrap my head around that, and we'll chat more about that later.
Hey, wait till you hear what my favorite album was, Sometime in
Uh-oh.
New York City.
I know.
I was just
Sometime
gonna
in New
say-
York.
I was just going to say, it can't be Sometime in New York City.
Number one, baby. I was just
Really?
listening. Yeah. Attica
And
State.
it's
Attica
fantastic.
State.
Well,
After you hear Jude, when Jude dissects it, she's right. It's an outstanding album.
There are more, I will say, there are more outstanding moments on that album than people give it credit for.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not a complete dud. It's, like some people say. There are a few tracks on there I could live without, quite frankly, but and it is not, I don't think it's mentioned in my book at all, but or maybe it is. I don't even remember, quite honestly.
In the back. Yeah,
But it's
somewhere.
Okay, I'm sure it's there somewhere. But wow, you're the first person I've ever met who's ranked that as their favorite Lennon album.
Yeah, I love it. I just absolutely, there's so many earworms, and it's so politically woke, and it's so aware. It's long before we all felt that way. The rights of women, civil rights. I mean, it was a spot on album, and I love that Texas guitar. And anyway, we could go on and on. But okay,
well,
so
John always was way ahead of his time.
he was. I mean, he was
in a lot of facets of his life, as you of course know. I don't have to tell both of you. My favorite track on that album, by the way, is New York City. I love it.
Love it. And he wanted to put that number one, but because he thought the political statement of woman is the end of the world meant so much to him, because he had been the one that abused women. He had been the one that did not. And he changed his heart so much, he wanted to put that number one, got all the permission from everybody to do it. NAACP, you name it, he got permission. They said they understood completely and stood by him, and then he got crucified for it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that's another story.
Right.
Okay, two things that you and I totally agree on are the John meets Paul, Brian discovers the Beatles in the cavern. And I found it was interesting, and I don't want to be like that guy that said everything was wrong. I'm saying this so that you can explain to us more. Number 17 is George Martin becomes the Beatles producer, and it falls after the Beatles and drugs and John meets Yoko. So tell us about that ordering.
Well, again, anybody could look at this and move things up and move things down. I mean, there's a case to be made. Without drugs, would the Beatles have created Sgt. Pepper, or would it be the album it is without drugs? It certainly informed a lot of that record, and subsequent records. Drugs did. Of course, George Martin was very important. I would probably move that a little bit up in the ranking if I had to do it today, because you can listen to the Decca audition tapes, for example, and then listen to the Beatles' early recordings and see what a difference George Martin made just by listening to those two different things. not to mention what a difference Ringo made. So, things could always be moved around a little bit, but, everything really in the top 20, 25, 30 is super important and probably could have been moved up. I could have had a 30-way tie for number one, quite frankly, or number two after John met Paul, because that's, of course, where it all stemmed from. But, things like Ringo joining, well, that, the Beatles wouldn't have been the Beatles without Ringo. Pete Best was a decent drummer, but he was no Ringo Starr. He didn't bring the drumming expertise nor the personality to the band that Ringo did. So would they have been the Beatles without Ringo? Revolver, would there have been a Sgt. Pepper without Revolver kind of leading into it? Revolver, in a lot of ways, was sort of Sgt. Pepper Jr. or the baby Sgt. Pepper. So, you can look at all this. John meeting Yoko, would a lot of John's greatest songs have happened had he not met Yoko? Would Sometime in New York City have happened if he hadn't met Yoko?
Probably not. Probably not. Yeah, it does. She changed him in a lot of ways, and many of them were extremely, extremely, extremely positive. Just
Definitely.
as May Pang had an influence. May Pang had a huge influence as well.
Oh yeah,
Definitely. Yeah. Well, okay. So one that I just cheered, I stood up and cheered about was that everybody, well, not everybody, a lot of people see Revolver as the pivotal album. But let me tell you, it isn't Revolver. It's Rubber Soul. It's the autumn of 1965. Everything changes from the sitar being introduced, world music being introduced, and on and on and on. And you ranked that as number 19. Rubber Soul signifies a new direction. Tell us your thoughts on that.
Well, it was certainly so much different from everything that had come before. The whole beat music persona was pretty much dropped. It had lasted all the way up through A Hard Day's Night. And then, as you mentioned, the sitar was being introduced, different lyrical, they were no longer writing, I love you, love me do, please, please me. They weren't writing directly to their fans anymore. And that's something John had mentioned, and I think Paul had mentioned during interviews. We weren't writing directly to our fans. We were growing as musicians. We were growing as lyricists. We were growing as people. And we were writing about our own experiences, things like In My Life and Girl, totally different from what had come before. And so I think, that was sort of the early clue to the new direction, they say.
Yes, it was. I mean, you think about John saying to George Martin for In My Life, I want something Baroque, something classical, something Baroque sounding. Can you imagine them saying that early in their career?
Right. Just 2 years before, you couldn't even have imagined that happening. It was still, yeah, shake your head and she loves you. And then in that short amount of time, they grew so rapidly and changed so drastically, but it was great because they still did it in a way that was accessible.
Yeah.
It wasn't so far out that people didn't get it. And no matter how far out the Beatles got, they still remained accessible. And I think that's part of their charm and part of the reason for their success and their long-lasting influence. It's also part of the reason why they never released Carnival of Light, I'm sure.
Right.
That was way out there, way out.
Yeah,
they didn't
definitely.
Want to do that.
No, and if you go back and look at Please Please Me and the early LPs, women are in giddy moon, June, spoon, croon relationships. By Rubber Soul, the woman in Drive My Car, the woman in Girl, the woman in Michelle who doesn't even know he exists, the woman in It's Only Love that he loves, but it's so hard loving you. Those women in Norwegian Wood are strong, powerful women, and they are calling the shots.
Right.
And you see the metamorphosis as we begin to move towards One Is the End of the World. I mean, things are changing. So I'm so with you on Rubber Soul being the pivotal LP, and you rank that at number 19. So let's go to number 22. And it's coming after the White Album, which I also agree is hugely pivotal. And the Beatles stopped touring, also highly pivotal, but it is the Beatles play Hamburg in 1960. And I think on my list, it was like number 6, 5 or 6. So give us your thought process on that.
Well, you know, that was where they really became a band. That's where they learned to play together. That's where they played off each other's strengths. That's where they played all those covers that were really, you know, the basis of their first several albums, from Please Please Me with the Beatles, Beatles for Sale. That's why they could go into the studio and knock out a lot of those songs in just a one-day session, because they had been playing them for years, honing their craft, honing their chops in Germany. And I think that was just a very important part of the story that, you know, maybe doesn't get told so often when, you know, people talk about the Beatles in general, sort of a worldview of the Beatles. They talk about Beatles coming to America. They talk about Sgt. Pepper, Abbey Road, and of course now Let It Be. But the earlier years are kind of glossed over a little bit, but they would not have been the success that they were without really paying their dues, you know, as basically a bar band in those days, you know, learning those songs, buying the records, you know, all those American R&B and soul and blues records, and really learning them, studying them, and then going out and performing them in front of an audience during what, 8-10 hour gigs, the crazy all night gigs that they had. So very important part of the story, I think.
Is that one of the ones you might bump up a little bit closer to the front if you did it over?
Probably, you know, it certainly could move up, because that's very important. But then, you know, you look, you know, or I look at the list and think, well, what would I move down? You know, would I move the first single down? Would I move the Beatles stop touring down, or Brian Epstein discovers the band, or the Ed Sullivan Show? It's you know, as you mentioned, it was tough putting this list together.
It is tough. It's so tough. And you're able to, and this is what people have got to hear. He's not doing this in a cause and effect order,
Right.
Because I can't wrap my mind around, I keep saying, well, but if you don't go to Hamburg, none of the rest of this stuff happens.
Right.
And your point is, yes. And your point is,
yeah, it's not a domino effect sort of thing. It's not if this domino didn't fall, then that one wouldn't have fallen. It's more, this is important, this is important, this is important. Well, this might have been a little more important, at least from my perspective. And again, everyone else is going to have their own view of things. If anyone else looked at these 100 moments and said, I would rank them exactly the same as you did, John, I would think, boy, there's something wrong with you.
you're kissing up to me.
I gotta thinking the same way that I do about anything, let alone something as controversial as this. So, but again, just so much fun to put together and to dive back into the history, and of course, listening to Beatles and solo Beatles music the entire time I was writing this book. It was just great, so much fun.
Yeah, you must have enjoyed it. Well, I know I'm the girl that eats the same thing at a restaurant every single time she goes. I mean, I even have nights. We have Saturday night pizza night, Friday night steak night. So I am in a teeny tiny box, but Lena is wide. She knows music from probably the 50s on up. And so I'm handing you over to her. She's the one that knows music. Go girl.
All right. So John, as we mentioned earlier, you not only rank moments that happened to the Beatles as a group in your book, but you also include events that transpired with their solo careers, like Wings and the Plastic Ono Band and so forth, which really made the task much more difficult, I have to say, for sure. One pivotal moment that you list at number 36 is John and Yoko's extensive Playboy interview, which came, of course, at the end of John's life. So how does this final interview function as an impactful moment for the Beatles?
Well, I think it's very impactful in the overall history of the group, because if you remember, those weren't just a couple of really brief magazine interviews that they did, or one brief magazine interview. It eventually was turned into a full-length book by David Sheff, who did the interviews with them. and probably the most extensive interviews that they had ever done, especially John. And the thing that was very, very important was the fact that they were able to talk to John about certain songs. Well, how do you feel about this? Who wrote this? What about this? And that now is going to serve as John's final word on the topic of all those songs that he wrote either by himself or with Paul. And so I think that's really, really important from a historical perspective.
Here's the book for those of you who don't know. And like he says, it's filled with, for example, John talks at length about how he wrote In My Life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, it's amazing to read, and to read his perspective on everything, whether it's music, relationships, politics, everything. It's fascinating. And a lot of it still holds true today, over 40 years later. And again, I think the most important part of the story as far as the Beatles go, would be him discussing those songs and discussing how they were written and the impact that they made on him. And even some kind of humorous things, like he didn't even remember writing Cry Baby Cry from the White Album.
Oh, no.
I think that's one of Paul's. And Chef didn't even correct him on it. I don't know why, but yeah, it's just incredible how you can write a song. It's a pretty darn good song and not even remember that you were the one who wrote it. I can't.
Well, George Harrison couldn't remember For You Blue. That's one of my very favorite Harrison. He goes, I don't remember that song at all.
Wow. That's funny.
Okay, so on with a little bit of comparing solo and band work. A significant moment in number 66 of your list is Paul's creation of the very first Beatles solo song with the release of Yesterday. Most Beatles fans are aware that the song, as beautiful as it is, created a great deal of tension in the summer of 1965 between Paul and the other Beatles. In fact, in Blackpool, George introduced Paul's solo performance as, "Here is Paul McCartney who knows how to take advantage of an opportunity." John was definitely threatened by the solo effort, and tensions between the two songwriters increased in the months that followed. In Beatles 100, the impact of Yesterday falls after the importance of Paul's Tug of War LP. So tell us about the importance of Tug of War and why it supersedes the group's reaction to Yesterday.
Well, I can talk about both of those things, actually. Tug of War was a very important record. A lot of it was because of the timing. It was the first music Paul had released after the death of John Lennon. And there was, of course, a song on there titled Here Today, which Paul still performs in concert, that he wrote about his relationship with John, a very touching, heartfelt tune. But people were expecting a lot from Paul. And he had sort of fallen out of favor a little bit, both critically and commercially. He had had a hit with Coming Up in 1980, but overall, the McCartney 2 album, where that song came from, wasn't super successful, wasn't one of his best efforts critically. And then before that, Wings' final album, Back to the Egg, was, I think, the worst performing McCartney solo record of the 70s. So he was in a little bit of a slump, and he had a lot to prove. And so I think the combination of him having a lot to prove, him really striking out mainly for the first time as a solo act after Wings broke up. I mean, McCartney 2 was just sort of a lark. I don't think he took that seriously. He had a lot to prove, so he went out and got some heavy hitters to help him. He did those 2 songs with Stevie Wonder. He did a song with Carl Perkins. Had a lot of people playing with him in the studio, Steve Gadd and all sorts of other folks who helped him out. And really had a lot to prove after the death of John, and wanted to come back into the limelight strong, and he really did. The album was a critical success. It was a commercial success. And no matter what one may think of Ebony and Ivory, it's still a very catchy song, and it was one of his bigger hits. And so I think that factors into the story, kind of brought Paul back into relevance a little bit and showed that when he was sort of backed into a corner, he could still bring the goods and come out with an album that was commercially and artistically triumphant. As far as Yesterday goes, interesting that you mentioned the opportunity knocks quote, because what George actually said was, now for Paul McCartney of Liverpool, opportunity knocks. And the reason why he said that, and you probably both know this, was there was an American Idol type program in Britain called Opportunity Knocks. And it was sort of, you would go on there and Mary Hopkin was actually on that show. I did a little bit of research and found that out. Paul's later protege.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
She was a winner on or performed on Opportunity Knocks. So it was sort of like an American Idol thing, and George was poking, a little bit of a poking jab at Paul there. Spike Milligan, the Goon Show. John was a big fan of the Goon Show. Spike Milligan was also on Opportunity Knocks. So obviously Paul knew George was jabbing him a little bit there, but
yeah,
that was the first live performance of that song. And you can see that as being Paul's first solo tune, really. You can also almost look at it as the beginning of the 1970s singer-songwriter era. It's not that big of a leap from Yesterday to some of James Taylor and Cat Stevens stuff that would come about 5 years later. Another funny moment when they performed it in concert was, I don't know where this concert took place, but Paul performed Yesterday, and the Beatles come back out on stage because it was just Paul. The rest of the Beatles come back out on stage, and John looks at Paul and says, "Thank you, Ringo. That was wonderful." Which broke everybody up, and I still laugh whenever I see that clip.
That wasn't Ed Sullivan, was it?
No, it was a live show. I'm not sure where, but it's on YouTube.
Yeah.
That's so cute. That's so cute. So, John, I'm a huge George Harrison fan, and I was delighted to see that the release of All Things Must Pass made the top 25 most pivotal Beatles events. So tell us why you state that this LP is remembered by many as Harrison's finest moment.
Oh, that's George's magnum opus, as they would say. It was sprawling. It was beautiful. It had his best known song on there, My Sweet Lord. It had a lot of other really wonderful tunes that, still sound great today when they reissued it and remastered it just in the past year or two. Really breathed new life into those songs, and you could hear George pouring his heart out. Basically, he had a lot of those songs in his pocket already. As folks who watched the Get Back movie have seen, he was trying to introduce All Things Must Pass, the song, to the Beatles during those rehearsals. And just so much great stuff. He'd been holding on to a lot of these songs for years and years and years, and he actually referred to it, not in the kindest terms, but he called it musical diarrhea. He was just kind of let it go, let it roll, as he says on that album, and just get it all out there. And so it was it's a wonderful achievement, and I think it was one of the most artistically and commercially successful post-Beatles records of any of the four. And it proved that George was a great singer, great songwriter, and probably most importantly to him at that point in his career, proved that he didn't need John or Paul to be able to produce a great record.
Right. I do enjoy at the end of your book, you have a chapter for each Beatle of the top 10 songs. So I enjoyed reading about your choices for George as well.
Oh yeah, there's so many great songs that all four of them did.
It's hard. It's hard to choose 10.
It's difficult to narrow it down to 10, and a lot of my choices, some might say are bizarre. Most people don't count Junior's Farm as their favorite Paul McCartney solo track, which I do. Most people don't count You Never Give Me Your Money. They don't rank that as their favorite Beatles song, but I do. So it's all about choice. And again, just like with the book, it's all subjective, and it's all what you feel and what you enjoy, but it's all good. I mean, all the Beatles stuff. Listen to any of it, and it's just all wonderful.
It is. It is. So both Jude and I really loved the foreword that you wrote about experiencing Paul McCartney with your daughter. And like you, I've shared some touching moments with my daughter as well when we listened to the Beatles. When she was about 10 years old, I walked in the kitchen one day and she was on the computer and she was listening to Yesterday. And she had tears just streaming down her face. And she says, "Mom, Paul really loved Linda so much, didn't he?" It was a very precious moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sweetheart, he did.
Wow.
That, but I've never forgotten that. And, that moment touched her. And hopefully my internet is working okay. I'm getting a message. Okay. But you wrote your foreword with tremendous passion and emotion. And I thought it would be nice for you to share with the readers what that experience was about.
Well, I wrote the foreword. Well, first of all, both of my children love the Beatles. How could they not, growing up in this house? But having said that, I didn't force them, and I would never do that. They never really grew up liking a lot of the music that their peers listened to. I remember we were walking into some place, and my son at the time was about 7 years old, and they were playing some really obnoxious rap song, vulgar rap song. And my son looked at me, he goes, "Dad, I don't like all that yo, 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 yo music." I said, "Yeah, I really don't like it so much either." But he loves the Beatles. One of my cool moments was me walking in the house one day, and I walk in the kitchen and I hear Blackbird coming from the other room. I'm like, "Oh yeah, I love that song." And then all of a sudden it stops and I'm thinking, "Wait, where's the vocal?" I go in and my son had taught himself how to play Blackbird on the acoustic guitar. And that's not an easy song to play on acoustic guitar. And
yes, very.
He had taken some guitar lessons a few years previous to that.
Wow.
And he had stopped. And I walked in and I said, "Michael, that was great." I said, "How did you learn how to do that?" He goes, "Oh, just on the internet, saw it on YouTube and watched it and learned how to do it." So, but my daughter Kayla and I have always had a special connection regarding the Beatles. I used to rock her to sleep when she was a baby, singing her Beatles songs. I remember singing "And I Love Her" as I would rock her to sleep. And we've seen Paul in concert together four times now, in Las Vegas and here in Los Angeles, 4 different times. And what I write about in the foreword of the book was, well, currently it's the last concert Paul has performed up through now, the final concert of his 2019 tour in Los Angeles at Dodger Stadium. And it was that special moment when Ringo came out on stage. And I get emotional just thinking about it. When Ringo came out on stage and joined Paul for the encore. And as soon as he walked out on that stage, Kayla and I both just started crying.
Yeah.
And we both knew why we were crying. It was not only the music that was being played, it's not only Paul and Ringo being together, it was that connection that we had. And as I write in the foreword, I asked her later, I know why I was crying. Why were you crying? And she said, "Daddy, I was just so happy to be able to share that moment with you."
Yeah. And sitting in my bed in Shreveport, Louisiana, reading that foreword, I was crying too.
I was too.
I read it again and I cry, honestly. And I wrote it, which is really, yeah. We're Kayla and I are both very emotional people, and music touches us, and the Beatles, the Beatles touch both of us. And, there's no other band that I can think of. And I'm sure it happens, but that touches people in that way, that brings people together in that way that spans all ages and races and colors and eras. I play drums in a Beatles cover band called Let It Be. And we have 80-year-old people in the audience dancing and singing the words to the songs. We had an 8-year-old kid come up and asked us to play, I forget what the song was, but it was a relatively obscure Beatles song you wouldn't expect an 8-year-old child to know. And it just, and everyone has a story. Everyone has a story. I remember we were playing a show in a nightclub, and this young woman was sitting near us, and every time we would break into a song, she would start to cry. And then she would compose herself. We'd finish the song. We'd break into the next song. She'd start to cry. And so we were chatting during the break, and I said, wow, these songs must really move you. And she goes, well, my dad just passed away about 6 months ago, and he was the hugest Beatle fan, and that's how we bonded. And every time you played a song, it was one that reminded me of him. What other band does that? I can't think of
No. I can't either. The Beatles are responsible for so many emotional relationships that people have.
Yep.
And it touches everybody, and no matter color, age, sex, it covers everyone. Everyone is emotionally drawn to them as well. So I just love all that you share with us in that forward. It's really beautiful. It sets a tender mood for the walk through the Beatles' years together and through their solo careers that your book affords. You begin the journey in appreciation for what they've meant to us all. And that is highlighted on every page via your outstanding memories that you share with the reader. So, John, please tell us how people can buy your book and where they can follow you on social media.
Well, I am on Twitter, PopDudeJB, or Facebook. I have a personal Facebook page where you can find me. I also have a Facebook page, John Borack Author, where I keep people up to date on what I'm doing with my columns in Goldmine magazine, appearances I'm making to promote the Beatles 100 and whatnot. You can find the book everywhere online. You can get it from the Rare Bird website. They have autographed copies available there. It's also available on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com. Somebody actually sent me an email. You can find it on the Home Goods website. I'm not sure why it's there. I was wondering if maybe Victoria's Secret website was going to carry it next. I wasn't sure, but it's out there all over. Or if you want an autographed copy directly from me, you can contact me through either of my social media accounts.
Fantastic.
Well, we love having you on the show, John. And I knew you were a musician, but I didn't know you were a drummer. I have one question to ask you that I didn't tell you I was going to ask you, but living where you live, did you know Hal Blaine?
I met Hal once. And we have a mutual friend, Jude, who is good friends with Hal Blaine, Alan Bernhoff.
Alan Bernhoff,
Yeah.
Yes. I knew Alan was friends with him, and I knew you knew Alan, so I thought, I wonder if he knew Hal.
Yeah, I met Hal at, I think it was when the Fest for Beatle fans came out here to LA in 2014.
Wow.
I was there speaking about my John Lennon book at the time. And kind of a funny story. Hal was at a booth signing autographs. I wanted to go up to him and tell him how much the standard stuff. I love your drumming on this song, soundtrack to my life, all this stuff. Hal was having a hard time with his iPhone at that particular moment. And so he was sitting at the booth with his iPhone, swearing at it. And this phone, I can't even, do you know how to work this? It's peppered with 4-letter words. And so I sort of helped him with his iPhone. And I never got the chance to tell him how great his drumming was or how much it meant to me, but I did get a photo with him. So that was my Hal Blaine story.
That is amazing. That is so amazing. Well, everybody, I want to say, you're not going to agree with the things that are in this book, and John's fine with that. He's fine with you discussing, reading his reasons, coming up with your own, but you want to have this book because I can't think of a better Beatles party. order some pizzas or make your own pizzas and a salad, get a couple of bottles of wine, and then say, all right, let's see what he's got for number 16. Heck no, that's not number 16.
Mhm.
And discuss it, because I think, don't you think it's the perfect conversation starter, John?
Well, that's what it was supposed to be. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
supposed to start those conversations to spark the disagreements. And, you know, Rarebird puts in their description of the book, John has created a book to agree with and disagree with.
Right,
You might agree with where I put something, but not where I ranked it. And
right.
that's part of the fun of the whole thing. It's a lighthearted look at the history. And, you know, it's just something to have fun with. It's not something to be taken seriously. It's not like I'm saying, this is a top 100, be all end all. You cannot disagree with me. Well, of course you can disagree with me.
Right.
My wife does it all the time.
As I have a neighbor across the street who told me something she wanted me to do in my yard and I didn't do it, and she was right. Her husband, she walked by and I said, I've ordered the t-shirt that says, listen to Emily. And he says, I have that t-shirt. It's so old, it has holes in it. So you got to just listen to her, John. Just listen
There you
to
go.
her. Thank
That's
you,
it.
John. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you.
Thank you both. I
Thank
had
you.
a great time. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It
We
was
love
great. It was really great. Love your book.
Thank you.
So, and thanks to each and every person listening to this podcast, viewing this podcast even. We appreciate the gift of your time being with us today. So don't forget to get a free copy of Little Dog in the Sun. Simply make a donation to the White Feather Foundation between now and Valentine's Day. And if you email me a confirmation of your gift, I will send you the book. My email address is stagg, STAGG, recipes@gmail.com, and I will send you the book. And remember that on February 14th and 15th, all proceeds from the sale of Jude's Shades of Life, Volume 5 in the John Lennon series, will be donated to the White Feather Foundation as well.
I wrote a blog called Wait Till It's Ad. It, you know, I think so many times that you have horrible days and you think, this is it, I can't stand this anymore. And I just think sometimes if you'll just wait a couple of days till the sun shines. So 318central.com, which you can find on Facebook, has my article for this month, Wait Till the Sun Shines. It's about a man named A.C. Steer who changed the face of this town. And when he heard that the great crash was coming of the 1920s, he shot himself. But wait till you hear the end of the story. Sometimes you need to wait till the sun shines. So 318 Central. Thank you, Lena, for reminding me.
Absolutely. So Jude and I will be seeing everybody twice in March, and it's going to be a really fun one. So first, at the beginning of the month, we're going to be chatting with the one and only rock and roll detective, one of our favorites, Jim Birkenstadt, who is quite a character. And he is releasing his new book, Mysteries in the Music, Case Closed. Jim has spent the last 3 years investigating some of the longest running unsolved mysteries in the rock world. Stories involving the Beatles and the Stones, Bob Dylan, Bob Marley, and Kurt Cobain, just to name a few. And he'll be here to share those stories with us, along with the strange and bizarre answers that he found. So don't miss this eye-opening show.
Yeah, and he's going to have his illustrator with him as well, who is very cutting edge and chic. And the cover that she's done for his book is almost as good as the one that Rand Kessler did for the cover of our last book. It's excellent, excellent, very, very excellent. And then at the end of March, Laura Kortner and Dr. Bob Hieronymus are going to be here for part 2 of their book, It's All in the Mind, Inside the Beatles' Yellow Submarine, which is a topic I know zippity-doo-dah about. So I cannot wait to hear what they have to say. And they are going to be here just the week before we all gather in person, April 1st through the 3rd at the New Jersey Hilton for the Fest for Beatles fans in Jersey City, New Jersey. If you haven't been there, it is a stupendous hotel overlooking the New York skyline. At night, you can sit and look out the window at the gorgeous skyline. It's going to be so much fun for everyone. So tune in to hear what Laura and Bob have to say as they talk about Yellow Submarine, and we'll have some sneak peeks of who will be at the Fest for Beatles fans as well.
So until March, stay warm and safe, and we wish you a day that makes you happy. Just look for the happy. We say that all the time. Don't forget to read Jude's inspirational Wait Till the Sun Shines at 318central.com, and please know that we're with you. You are not alone. So here's the food for thought, food for the soul, food for the love of rock and roll.
Ta-ra and shine on.